So our question here is what mass of sodium hydroxide is needed to produce 1 ton of sodium sulfate? And our first step is to work out the relative formula mass of sodium hydroxide and sodium sulfate. So I'm doing sodium hydroxide first. I'm finding out the relative atomic mass of sodium, that's 23, oxygen 16, and hydrogen is 1. I add all those together to get the relative formula mass of sodium hydroxide, which is equal to 40. Next step is to do exactly the same thing for sodium sulfate. So sodium sulfate is Na2SO4, and again Na is 23. However, this time there are 2 sodiums, so I need to do 2 times 23 to get myself 46. Then I need to work out the relative atomic mass of sulfur from my periodic table. Have a look, that is 32. Then going to have a look at oxygen, but this time there are 4 oxygens, so I need to do 4 times 16, and that works out at 64. There we go. Add all that up, the 46, 32 and 64, to get myself 142. That's our first step done. The second step is to divide the formula mass of the unknown chemical by the one of the known chemical. So I'm going to do 40 divided by 142. 40 is the unknown one, 142 is the one that I know. But I have 2 sodium hydroxides, so I need to times the 40 by 2 to get 80. So that's 80 divided by 142. That equals 0.56. The last step is to then take my answer, 0.56, and multiply it by the known quantity. I know that I need 1 ton of sodium sulfate, so I do 1 ton of sodium sulfate times 0.56. That works out as 0.56 tons of sodium hydroxide needed. Okay, so here's a question for you to have a go at. It's very similar to the previous one. It says what mass of sodium hydroxide is needed to produce 0.75 tons of sodium sulfate. The steps there are below. Pause the video, see if you can do the question. We'll then go through the answers. So just as before, I'm going to work out the relative formula mass of sodium hydroxide and sodium sulfate. Sodium hydroxide is 40, so I'd work out the atomic mass of each of those things, add them together. And for sodium sulfate, it's 142, bearing in mind there are 2 sodiums, 4 oxygens, so I need to be really careful when I do that. So my second step is to divide the formula mass of my unknown chemical, sodium hydroxide, by the known chemical, sodium sulfate. So sodium hydroxide is 40 for its formula mass. However, because in my chemical equation up at the top it says 2 NaOH, I need to times that 40 by 2. I'm going to divide that by the relative formula mass of the known one, sodium sulfate, 142. But if I look up at my chemical equation, there's no 2 in front of the sodium sulfate, so I leave it as it is. That works out as 80 divided by 142. Which is equal then, if I put it into my calculator, to 0.56. And then the final part of the process is to multiply that answer, 0.56, by the known quantity. And the known quantity is 0.75 tons. So I know that I want 0.75 tons of sodium sulfate, so I times my 0.56 by that amount, and that tells me I need 0.42 tons sodium hydroxide to get that sodium sulfate. Okay, so here's another question. In this one you've got magnesium oxide producing 2 tons of magnesium sulfate, so you'll need to work out some new relative formula masses, divide those by each other, and then find out the quantity of magnesium oxide needed. Okay, so your first step is to work out your relative formula masses. Magnesium is 24, oxygen 16. When you add those 2 things together you get 40. Then on the other side you've got magnesium sulfate, which when you add all those separate elements together it gives you 120. Okay, step 2 is to then divide the formula mass of the unknown chemical, which is going to be 40, because I don't know how much magnesium oxide I've got. I do know how much magnesium sulfate I'm going to use, or going to get, sorry. So I'm going to take 40 as my magnesium oxide. Bear in mind there's no 2, 3, whatever you like in front of the magnesium oxide, so it's just 40. Then I divide that by 120, the relative formula mass of my known chemical, and I do that sum, I get 0.33. Okay, and the final part of that process is to take that 0.33, my answer to the previous step, and to multiply that by the known quantity. I know that I'm going to get 2 tons of magnesium sulfate, so I multiply that by 2 tons to work out that I need 0.66 tons of magnesium oxide to get those 2 tons of magnesium sulfate.